Welcome to On Marketing, a show where we explore marketing's first principles, mental models, and my favorite, contrarian takes. My aim is not to tell you what to think, it's assisting you in improving how you think about marketing and life. It's October 27th, 2023. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist by day and a podcast host by night. Joining me today is a one and only Bolaji Oyejide, and sorry if I butchered the last name. He's currently a head of content at Hello Audience, creator of Demand Wars, the best show for B2B marketers, and author of children's book in his past, a fan of Survivor, who isn't, and also somebody who wanted to be Peter Parker's Superman when he was a kid. I mean, I think he's pretty damn close, if you ask me. In our conversation, we discuss how marketing is about understanding your audience and building relationships and not just persuasion, how storytelling is a powerful marketing tool, how to build community by featuring your audience in the content creation, how to make time for play outside of work to boost productivity and well-being, and how to adopt an attitude of understanding others before being understood. Ready to get in? Before we do, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter to get new episodes with extra insights delivered to your inbox every Friday. The link to join is in the first line of the show notes. Also a reminder, if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can go over to YouTube and see my beautiful mug. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also listen to this on a podcast while you go for a walk. Whatever works for you, please indulge. And finally, the opinions shared in this podcast are individual views of the host and guests, not representing their employers or associated organizations. This content is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered professional marketing guidance. Listeners, act on the information provided at your own risk. Sorry, that's for the legal team. Now I'll see you on the other side. What is marketing?
Can I call a friend, Jordan?
I think you used all of those.
Dang. Don't you hate that the hardest questions are the simplest ones? Jordan's like, what is the meaning of life? Like, dog, I don't know. Like, give me a minute. Can I get a gimme question first? What is marketing? Okay, so let me think about how I want to answer this. I heard this saying once, Jordan, and it's not, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember it exactly, but it was termed the comedian's dilemma. And it's something to the effect of a comedian's job isn't to figure out how to make an audience laugh. A comedian's job is to find an audience that already thinks they're funny. I've been to some, I love going to watch stand-up comedy. It fascinates me. It is like, public speaking is one of the greatest fears of a lot of us humans. And to see someone get up on stage, become completely vulnerable, tell these stories, a lot of times edgy stories. I mean, you've got to figure as a comedian, I'm about to say this thing and I possibly could piss off half the audience just right off the bat. And to say it with confidence, to just put it out there. The best comedians, they probably do offend a good amount of people, but they know that the folks that are coming to watch them already have a sense of what brand of offensive comedy they tell. So don't be in the audience if you find them offensive. I think good marketers aren't going out there trying to convince the world that they've just created the wheel or sliced bread. They're going out to find people who like to eat the bread, ripping it off without it being sliced. They're going to find the people who like the sawdust and don't need the pretty thing at the end. That's what real marketing is, and that's the harder part. It's super easy, Jordan, to broadcast, to just put stuff out there into the world, and I don't know what's going to work. Spaghetti at the wall. Most of us corporate marketers, we've been told to do spaghetti at the wall. We've done spaghetti at the wall. Unfortunately, every now and then, it randomly will work. And people who are not marketers believe, aha, the approach is continue to throw the mess at the wall. I don't think that's marketing. I think ultimately, marketing is the act of inspiring change, but it's not persuasion. It's not me coming to tell Jordan that I know you think the sky is blue, it's actually gray. No, it's me walking along with Jordan, getting to know Jordan, and over time, we share philosophies about how to read the weather. And then one day he's going to be like, you know, that sky used to be blue, but I think it's actually shades of gray now. That's what I think marketing is.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think we could probably end the show at this point, Bolaji. That was a really well put way in. And weird enough, it's always cool how this happens. I've been kind of fascinated with comedy lately. Kill Tony is a show that I've been trying to kind of take some inspiration of how it's like a live show. They bring comedians up and trying to think, how can I do that for marketing or whatever? Haven't landed on an answer, but your point is so valid that not all comedians resonate with everybody. The joke you could say is only as good as the recipient. Like a joke could be really good, quote unquote, for one, but so there's arguments then that all marketing is subjective. But I think parts of what you're saying is there are fundamentals, there are things that we can kind of fall back on throughout it. And just like you could probably dissect 10 different comedians and they all hold 3 traits, 4 traits that are the same, but one is kind of comes from this jokes on liberals, another one is, you know, jokes on this, and yes, it will offend someone in that camp, but they all get these fundamentals. So for you, what are like 1 to 2 of those marketing fundamentals? And you talked about them. Don't, you know, convince people, find people that kind of see the world similar. And I'm totally on board with that. But what's 1 to 2 other fundamentals that are kind of across the board good for marketing?
Yeah. Some of the core marketing fundamentals. So one of them is absolutely that one about not trying to persuade people. And it's maybe worth double clicking on a little bit, because I think traditional sales, the traditional salesman or salesperson has been viewed as the golden-tongued person or silver-tongued individual who can persuade folks that water is actually wine, and they can just work these magical mental gymnastics to make people say, shut up and take my money. There are individuals who absolutely can do that. It's not that that's not a trait, but there's such a thing as buyer's remorse. I remember being a young professional. My first job was for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was a young kid coming out of college for the first time, making money. You can tell me nothing, Jordan. Like, come on, man. I'm going to McDonald's and I'm supersizing everything. And for 3 of the cars behind me, too. Like, I was making it rain, Jordan. And so I got invited to this presentation where this organization was, it was some sort of real estate presentation. They were going to offer like a lavish buffet afterwards, dinner and all that. I was like, okay, I'll go. It was a timeshare presentation. I'd never been to one before. Nobody warned me, Jordan. I had no idea what I was getting into. And so I get in there. They're like, it's just going to be 60 minutes. It's going to be a fun presentation. It took about 2 hours. Pressure sale after pressure sale. I would tell them no in all kind of ways. Like, I was telling them no in Japanese and Korean. I didn't even know I spoke those languages. They're like, okay, let me get my manager. It was horrible. And they almost persuaded me. Over time, I've been to about a dozen of these presentations. I've actually bought the product a couple of times, Jordan, because more often than not, the product is actually attractive. They have these beautiful, beautiful resorts in these wonderful locales. And you're like, yeah, I could see me living like this. My wife and I bought a timeshare on 2 different occasions. And these sales processes are so manipulative that the government has built it into law that there's a 72-hour window during which you can give the product back, no questions asked. And both times we gave the product back, because once we got out of I think Steve Jobs used to be accused of having this sort of, I forget what it was called, but he had like a sphere of influence where if you were around him, he could persuade you of anything. But once you stepped out of that sphere, you're like, wait, what? Why am I crawling and barking like a dog? So persuasion is a very charismatic trait. I don't think it's a marketing fundamental. Let me put to you the ultimate marketing fundamental from my point of view. The ultimate marketing fundamental is being able to step into someone else's shoes and experience that person's existence. There's a word that I learned a few years ago called sonder. I had the opportunity, wonderful opportunity, Jordan, to deliver a TEDx talk, and it was at a local high school. And all the speakers, aside from myself, were high schoolers. And this one young lady, she was the junior, she comes up there and she talks about sonder. I'm like, what is sonder? I'm a grown-ass man. I never heard of the word sonder before. I'm like flipping through a dictionary. And so sonder essentially is this idea that every individual on earth has as rich, as detailed of an inner world as you do. So, Jordan, to you, you are the center of the universe. You wake up, everything revolves around Jordan, right? But it's the same for your wife, and it's the same for me. And so most of us marketers are trying to pierce that reality, and we're trying to insert ourselves and almost say, hey, Jordan, I know you're really busy right now, but I'm about to become the center of your universe. Hey, look, here's my story. I'm the hero. Here's where you fit in. At some point, we need to find a way to remove ourselves as the hero in the story, as the hero in the narrative, and put our buyer, put our future customer into that hero role. You're not Frodo, right? You're not Peter Parker. You are Uncle Ben. You are Gandalf. If you can put yourself into that mentor role instead of the hero role, there's still a role for you, okay? You'll still get your royalties. They'll still put your name in the credits and your mom will see it, but it ain't about you. That's the fundamentals of marketing.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, typically empathy, right, would be used, but I really enjoy that sonder, that fact that we all are beings that kind of, to your point, the world revolves around us. And I think that's both a marketing trait and I think a good person trait to be able to get outside your orbit and realize, I mean, you could go through history, right? I mean, we thought we were the center of the universe. And I think there was the pushback against that was so much of like ingrained in us is this importance of me, of I'm the only individual. And I think, the best marketing can really put themselves in their world to then understand what progress are they trying to make? What, jobs are they trying to get done? What anxieties, frustrations, can I write their diary as if I'm them? So I really like that. And I think that got me going because I'm a kind of a word nerd. So I'll definitely be doing some researching of that word. And I know the 3 to 4 listeners with us, maybe some of them also didn't have this word. So I'm thankful for that. What is one thing though that you've changed your mind on? So I love a lot of these kind of thoughts. They're really refined and obviously you've spent a lot of time, but is there anything recently within a year or 2 years that, I thought for me, it was a Gary Vee model. Everybody needs to be putting out 150 pieces of content a day. And now I'm a little bit different on that thought. What might be something you've altered your opinion on or your stance on recently or lately?
So, Jordan, I've had the opportunity to work at a handful of startups over the past 4 to 5 years. And it's been a really interesting time to work in B2B tech startups because the ground has been shifting under our feet. Buyer behavior has been evolving as the technology evolves. So, things like dark social, whether it's Slack communities, private communities, buyers are much more so in touch with one another today than they were 5 or 10 years ago. Things like inbound marketing funnels, a lot of these things worked in the previous decade. They're not working quite as much now. And marketers they found themselves in this really awkward, we're in this fracture, we're in this fissure of the old world and the new world. The old way of doing marketing and sales and this emerging new way. The emerging new way hasn't established itself yet. It hasn't found its foothold yet. And yet, a lot of us can see that the old way isn't working and it hasn't worked for a while. So here's something that I changed my mind on in the past few years. I, perhaps in my naivete, thought that by presenting data, by presenting both qualitative and quantitative, I would have success in persuading executives to adopt the new way, or one of the hypothetical new ways of doing marketing. And I found that over time, I was sort of banging my head against a brick wall. And I've learned that data often does not persuade people. This is my opinion. Data alone does not persuade people. Now, this is not a rant against data at all, but it's simply to say, if you look at the history of humanity, even before we had communication in the written form, what did we have? We had storytelling. We had mythology. we had cautionary tales, we had nursery rhymes, and all of these things, they were actually passing data along from person to person. They were saying, hey, you know that really big cat with the two huge teeth? It's not a pussy cat. Do not pet that cat. Don't feed that cat. We're going to call it a saber-toothed tiger. Trust me. Trust me. Right? That's data, but we passed it down through storytelling. Now, when we talk about storytelling, the story has to have some relevance to the listener. So we talked about how instead of the brand or the product being at the center of the narrative, we need to shift the customer to the center of the narrative, right? We need to find ways to do that, even when we're selling to executives. But you also have to have a frame of reference. If I start to tell you, Jordan, stories about life on Mars, it might take a minute for you to really figure out, how does this connect to my life? How do I apply this? But if I start talking about the Green Bay Packers, if I start talking about my affinity or lack thereof for cheese, if I start talking about marketing or psychology, these are all sort of milestones. It's sort of like lampposts. Like, okay, I know where we're at on the map. So now if you start to use that as a distinctive point, okay, I can find my way back there. I know what you're talking about. I get the reference. And so in trying to persuade executives, I found that it can be difficult to change an executive's worldview. Think about this. SEO used to be brand new. It used to be cutting edge. It used to be something that executives they hadn't heard of it. It sounded risky. They weren't trying to do it. Email, even. We have to go a bit further back, but at a certain point, email was a novelty. Right? At a certain point, webinars were a novelty. At a certain point, marketing automation was a novelty. Eventually, even the marketing funnel was a novelty back in 2005. Eventually, those things were around for long enough that executives were like, okay, I've heard enough people talk about this. I get it. You know, it's table stakes. It's baked in. I get it now. You don't have to persuade me. But for a lot of the new marketing approaches, with dark social, with building an audience, with ungated content, that stuff is still novelty. And so if you're trying to convince an executive team to adopt those things and they're not buying it, my recommendation would be that might be a losing battle. You might want to, over time, find executives who are open to these new approaches. That's something I changed my mind on in the past few years.
That's powerful. I mean, there's so many nuggets within that. I think something that just is sticking out to me is data doesn't clearly change people, or else smoking. There's certain things that there's clear data that proves elsewhere that this is bad or I'm going to die. Doesn't matter. So I think like even into your point, I think there's these points where there's less data, but there's still data. So the fact way back when that there's some data of like, we're not the center of the universe anymore. Well, sadly, the people putting out that data kept getting killed, to eventually that data became mainstream right. To your point, that's where then true. Now everybody would be an idiot to believe we're no longer, or we're the center of the. So I think my question for the 1 to 2 listeners, or at least what I constantly ask is what is today, to your point, SEO back when? What's today something that, is going to be very uncomfortable to engage in, invest in, if I'm even, an exec, or just a lot of marketers are still, I would say, kind of behind, or they just take truths to be truths without digging deeper. Oh, the customer journey is linear. Is it really? When's the last time you bought something? Is it that linear? So I think for me, I'm always questioning, you can take the argument too on, like, just in general on morality, and that is like, will I be on the wrong side of history by taking this stance? Like, clearly throughout history, we can look at good intentioned people that owned slaves. So in the end, they ended up on the wrong side of history, and they weren't asking what today will be looked back on history as not good. And I should probably be one of the first ones to change, even if nobody else is saying it. So I really like those points you bring up that tie into a lot of like world things or just life that I've been thinking about in my spare time. So
that's what's really, up. That's what's really up.
Good stuff. So you talked about kind of the storytelling. I really find that to be a crucial point of differentiation as a marketer. Your ability to tell a story, but then obviously that's a kind of a Russian doll where how do you tell good stories? You keep pulling off that doll to be like, okay, you need data to your point. The data needs to be contextual to that person to understand. So jumping into a concept you talked a lot about, binge-worthy content, or just content that really gets people engaged, building an audience. Like, where do people like make the first mistake if like they're starting to realize like, okay, the old way of creating content on my product or whatever isn't working? What are some mistakes or things that people don't get quick enough of how to do good storytelling and how to create binge-worthy content for your company, or even, I guess, as an individual? But
Yeah. Oh, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. So one of the beautiful things about the greatest philosophers, one of the beautiful things about the books that have stood the test of time, is that at the core, what they're teaching is simple. It's not, there isn't sleight of hand. It's not rocket science. A lot of times it's simple. It's stuff that probably your grandma could have told you or has told you when you were younger. So in terms of creating binge-worthy content, we probably shouldn't look much further than our own lives. What are we binging today? Let me try to think of some of the stuff that I binge, and Jordan, maybe you can share some of the stuff that you're binging as well. Right now, so I've got 2 kids. My wife and I, we've got 2 kids. They're both teenagers now, and they're at that age where, you know, what mom and dad find funny, they don't necessarily find fun, is like different tastes. But we're able to binge. We started binging Survivor about 6 months ago. Like, I was watching it. They wondered, like, what are you watching? What is this? Before you know it, the whole family is watching. Oh, can't we watch this one more episode? What is it about a Survivor episode? Let's unpack this a little bit. What is it about a Survivor episode that can get a 13-year-old and a 40-year-old, like, on the edge of their seat? First, there's a compelling premise. You take 20 or 30 strangers and you put them in a remote location. Like, now, a lot of us love to travel, but most of the time we're trapped within our daily routine: home, school, work, grocery. So if you say, oh, you're going to a deserted island? Okay, interesting. Next, think of the human element. They're taking people who don't know each other. All right. Now, for anyone who's worked in any size of corporation, you know that if you get 3 people together, you'll have 5 different opinions on any given thing. And pretty soon, one person is going to be getting on the other 2's nerves. That's just how humans work. Okay. We are peculiar individuals. So putting all these people together in close proximity and then creating situations where they have to compete for resources. Oh, come on. That's must-see TV. Then you make the people diverse. Old people, young people, fit people, not so fit people, very nice people, kind of disturbed people. You got to give the show creators some credit. They really put together a cast that's going to have conflicts. So I would say to you that some of the things that, this is a reference that I'm sure most people have watched Survivor or have heard of Survivor. What are the lessons we're learning from something that's been right in front of our face? Come up with a compelling premise. Play up the human element. Raise the stakes. Have cliffhangers. If you want it to be binge-worthy, don't give them the whole 13-hour episode all at once. Break it up. End each one on a cliffhanger. Then give some of those lampposts previously on, next on. I don't remember which show it was that started that, but a whole bunch of them do it now. That's something I've never seen in B2B before. Why are we not doing previously on and next on? Why do you expect that I'm just so into your content? I remember what you said last. I don't remember what I had for breakfast, Jordan. Help me out, right? Give me some guidelines. So that was just one example. We just took something that's commonplace to us. That's something that I binge in my household. I'll give maybe one more example, and maybe, Jordan, you could think of something, a piece of content that you binge. So I grew up, Jordan, reading comic books, right? I grew up in Nigeria, and I was a nerdy kid, shy kid, ton of social anxiety. Maybe collecting comics probably didn't help with my social life very much, but comic books were my outlet, right? There were these fantastical, mythological individuals who, when they put the mask on, they were heroic, they were brave, but when they took the mask off, they were human like me. So that put me at the center of the story, didn't it? I thought I was Peter Parker, Jordan. I thought I was Peter Parker. You got this little Nigerian kid running around thinking he's a white teenager from Queens, New York. No, you're not Peter Parker. But I could see myself in that character. Put your audience at the middle of the narrative. Humanize these stories. Too much of B2B content is about perfection. Oh, we're shiny, we're new. Just adopt our product for $19.99 and your life will change forever. I don't care about your brand, your product, until I know the people behind it. I don't want them to be incompetent, Jordan. I want them to be competent. But once I like Jordan is good at what he does. I told him before we started, I was like, man, dude, your questions are next level. How do you do that? And he was like, I appreciate you noticing that. I like to take a jobs to be done approach. I didn't know that. This was just an observation. Now there's a human connection between us, right? So you got to be competent, but then behind that competence, show the humanity. Let that come out. A lot of those things make content binge-worthy.
Man, I love that. Also note, I am a Survivor binger myself. Me and my wife a few years back kind of went through that cycle where it just pulls you in to the points that you talked about. And I think even more so as I'm working on season 2 here, thinking more in segments rather than just this long conversation that nobody can look towards. It's like I always love at the end, they do the voting. And then in the middle, we have some games. And then you have this kind of a thing where you can always look towards something. There's the kind of post, as you were talking about way earlier, that, okay, we're at this point, we're at that point. That's so my own podcast, it's like we're on the hot seat. Okay, it's getting into the life section. Cool. And maybe somebody only cares about life. They zoomed to 34 minutes on every of my podcast. Great. If that helps you make progress, that's perfect. So I really enjoy that, thinking more in creating shows. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of I'm definitely not the person that's having conversations with tons of founders, tons of executives, but the conversations I do have, there's this hesitancy towards creating a show, even developing a premise as you're talking about, a unique angle of like, what's this show about? How do we demand wars? All of these ways that you can create something that really, if you break it down enough, it's not too novel. It's not that new, but the way it's packaged makes it enjoyable to a subset of people. And I think that's pulling a lot of the themes throughout kind of today is create a segment that won't make everybody happy, but make certain or create the segments that create a certain amount of people to feel very connected or create that community. So I love Survivor and I love the ways that you pointed out, but I think the segments or the way that the show's structured is something people come to feel comfortable. There's not as many surprises. There is surprises, but I know this is going to be how each show or each episode goes. And even like a meta, having every 5 episodes be the 5th episode's an hour, like and a half or whatever, then you always can know, okay, there's this kind of a cycle. So I really think it's good. And something that I do want to give, I guess, a new show that I've binged, but Wrexham, the soccer team. So Ryan Reynolds and the guy that nobody cares as much about, I forget his name, but anyways, these two dudes buy this team, right? So for me, that's marketing, right? They bought this team and their instant question is, how do I get attention? How do I get people to care? So they could just run ads to every soccer fan. They could do all these things, but instead they said, let's create a show. Let's document, let's get real, show people's struggles, even when things went wrong. Rob McAfield, I think that's his name, he was like, pissing one of the other people off. And it's like most B2B companies, they'd hide that. We're all cool. We're all friends. But it's like they put that on full display. And as your point, I connected. I'm like, I feel that with my, my superiors. I feel that with someone at work. But in the end, we work together and I can connect with that show in that way.
What a great example. I love that. And Ryan Reynolds, by the way, has proven himself to be phenomenal at marketing. You look at what he's doing with Mint Mobile. He's got, I think, a vodka, or one of these alcoholic beverage companies
Aviation
as well.
Gin, yeah.
Aviation Gin. It's a gin. He's really good at marketing, so that's a really good example. He spent all this money on a football team, and the way he chose to market it was a show.
I think those are those signals that I use to your point, maybe not convince others, because sometimes it just doesn't matter what the data says, but it convinces me, to your point, this is a new model. This is the way that the world's turning. And I can't, predict where it's going to be, but by having that, I'm positioning myself as a marketer or as a company to be bestly for that future state, because I'm seeing these signals of, if he's doing it, it has to be some sort of, and in the past, you can look even of like certain companies would have invested early into SEO. So that could have been a signal of like, look at Amazon. There's nobody is really using SEO to dominate, to gain kind of market share. Maybe we should, where now it's too late, or some could say that it's kind of too late to make a move in that. So I have a question. You talk a lot about, and it's baked into community is created somewhat through shows. Like there's a Survivor community, there's these communities. How do you use content? How do you think about content to build that community? Like, is there certain types of content that doesn't build community? Is there certain types that does build community? Or how do you think of the content and community interlock, or like how they lead to one in another?
Yeah, it's a really intriguing question. I think the concept of community in business has been evolving over the past number of years. When Slack sort of entered into the consciousness broadly, it entered there's this framework, the technology adoption lifecycle. It comes from a book titled Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore that was written a while ago. A bunch of tech companies try to use that model. So initially you get the innovators, you get the early adopters, and then there's a chasm, and things could dip, and you really have to get your strategy right in order to jump to the early majority. So Slack is one of those companies that jumped to the early majority. Now everybody adopted it, and it almost became synonymous with community. And I don't know how much the COVID quarantine impacted Slack fatigue, but with people not going into offices, everybody was on Slack. And I think as we came out of the quarantine, people started to get that Slack fatigue, just like they started to get Zoom fatigue as well. So when we think about, what ultimately is community and how can content facilitate that, I think the first principle is that your audience, your ideal audience, has to be at the center of your content strategy. So gone are the days of, us as brand owners being like Moses coming from on high with the two tablets. Hey, I've got the wisdom. Here it is. I present it. I bequeath it, Jordan, to you. And you're like, oh, all this wisdom. People aren't really waiting around on us for that anymore. It's much more powerful if, we are experts in our different lanes, in our sphere. So this is not to minimize our expertise. But, nobody likes a know-it-all, first of all. Okay? Our customers, our prospects, they're kind of smart too. They know stuff that we don't know. To the extent that we can collaborate, create collaborative content, start co-creating content, create content that stars your audience. Everybody likes to see themselves. Everybody likes to be the center of the story or see themselves on TV. They want to tell their mom, hey, I was featured on, the top 40, fill in the blank, or I was featured on this show or in this ebook. How often are we actually featuring our audience? A lot of people downplay the efficacy of podcasts. Podcasts have been around for a decade and a half or so. It's old news. The ROI is hard to measure. They don't generate leads right away. The discoverability is not great. Thanks a lot, Apple Podcasts. Like, it's super hard to grow a brand new audience from scratch with a podcast. But at the same time, if you start to look at different sorts of metrics, if you look at the fact that you could call up probably any CEO in your target audience and pitch them, hey, would you come on my podcast? You've got a much better chance at getting a response versus if your SDR or your account executive reaches out to them, hey, would you want to sit in on a demo? Get them on your podcast first, right? So let's start to make our audience the star of the content. And if we do that, they're much more likely to want to share it, to want to engage with it, to give us more content ideas. I'll add one other pillar next to that. So we want to star our audience, but let's not make them do all the work. If you go to a CEO in your target audience saying, hey, I'd love to interview you, so what do you want to talk about? Man, nobody got time for that. Create a premise. Create a compelling premise. Create a compelling premise that matters to them. I like to obsess, Jordan, obsess about what's keeping my target audience up at night. what do they worry about? What are their big problems? They might have 99 problems, and I can't help with about 90 of them. Okay, so we're not going to talk about those. But the remaining 9, maybe I've got expertise in those. And I'm like, I'm going to pick one of those things. I know this thing is a hot button issue for my audience. Boom. My premise is going to be based on that thing. Every time I have a conversation, it's going to be on that topic. And in a year's time, my brand will become the go-to resource for how to deal with this topic. So you marry a hot button issue with putting your audience at the center of the conversation, and then you combine that into a compelling premise, like a Survivor or like Jordan's show. Now you've got the ingredients of something that people want to be part of. They want to talk about it. They want to talk on it. And through that, you might get community. But let's not forget, community is not us controlling the conversation. At best, we're like the host of the house party. We're setting out some snacks, okay? We got a nice cool vibe going, some nice music in the background. It's chill. Nobody's really acting up. If anybody's a jerk, we're kicking them out. Beyond that, we're letting people just mingle. We're not going around like, okay, everybody put on a name tag. All right, I'm going to facilitate something. Like, chill out.
Yeah.
Create a cool vibe. And everybody's going to want to come to your house party.
I love that. Again, many takeaways. One thing that just instantly comes out, I've had this thought a lot of, like the fact that we get marketed to, we engage with stuff. So we clearly have some sense of what we engage with and what we don't, but it's like we put on this coat of marketing and that goes out the window. We think they'll read this white paper that I would snooze through. And I've always struggled with why. And I think as you're talking and as this conversation went on, there's this, I don't think it's a conscious arrogance, but it's this unconscious arrogance that our audience is stupid and we need to give them things and they'll watch whatever we want. And clearly something comes to mind is Bud Light. Regardless of whether they should or shouldn't be, pro-trans or whatever that whole thing went, there was those audio clips that came out where the CMO or someone in there is kind of, shitting on people. Like they won't even, they're just beer drinkers. And this thing where it comes out of like, that I think is one of the worst sins. So it's like, do not kill, do not, like I think that should have been a commandment is always put your audience on a higher intelligence, a higher standard than you might naturally do, because likely they're there. And if they're not there, they'll feel good that you at least gave them that leeway.
I love that.
The alternative is like underplaying them where even if they're dumb, nobody likes to feel dumb. So like even if I'm dumb, it would hurt. I'm like, geez, they spelt this out for me. So I really enjoy that fact. And I'm working through my own self. I've been reading a lot of books on humility because I've struggled with that. This level of arrogance that I'm really smart. And it's like, yes, you've done a lot of reading, but like that doesn't help move the group forward because you kind of put it out there so hardcore rather than ask a question. Or, which I love you ended on, marketers like create the space for things to happen. Like create the space for a good party. Don't force a good party. It won't happen. Create space. Just like a good conversation, a good relationship comes from creating space versus forcing. So that was a really good takeaway I took away from you sharing that. Wow, I could talk all day on marketing, Bolaji, so I'm going to have to move us to the hot seat. So I'm going to hit you with 10, 15 questions and give me your quick response. Yeah, right. Get ready. Give your quick response, but if you feel you need to go deeper, I'm not going to cut you off. So the goal is to go quick, but if you feel like there's something you want to put a flag in, let's definitely talk about it. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Series content. So something that is, as we're talking about, very much built so you can do that forward, back, or standalone pieces for building an engaged audience.
Series content all day.
I love it. Organic community growth or incentivized referrals for scaling membership or community?
Organic. It's a slow burn, but it'll last longer.
Which creates better content, personal storytelling or data-driven content?
We already talked about this one. Personal storytelling. I bet you remember at least one of my personal stories from this conversation we've had. Personal storytelling.
100%. Yeah, you wanted to be Peter Parker, but you weren't Peter Parker. Short form video content or long form written content?
Ooh, that's a tough one, but I'm going to go long form because it can be converted into various short forms.
I love that. Organic social media growth or paid advertising for building an online community?
Organic, but I don't like how the social networks are throttling back organic reach. So there's an asterisk on that.
All right, now we're going into the yes or no questions. Is the binge-worthy content model applicable across all industry sectors? Are there some that just shouldn't create binge-worthy content, or do you believe every company could gain value by engaging in binge-worthy content?
Yes, every company could gain value from binge-worthy content.
Is it viable to have demand generation without a substantial content strategy?
Absolutely no.
Does every brand why did I even put that word? Does every brand need a human face? Yeah. Thank you. Does every brand need a human face or personal brand, or can they do without kind of having like a face of the company or a few faces?
No, every brand does not need a human face. I think there's a lot of examples to that point. Having said that, you should ask yourself about your company. You probably could be served by having more of a human face.
I love that. Is there a one-size-fits-all approach to community building?
Absolutely not.
Does every successful content strategy require or need a decent-sized budget, or can you do it without?
You definitely can do it without, and you probably should start without, because that will force you to practice first principles.
I love that. All right, now we're into the open-ended, so if there is anything that you want to go deeper on, feel free to here. Yeah, wipe the sweat off.
Like
What's one tool indispensable for creating binge-worthy content? What's a software, a tool that you just couldn't go without to create the binge-worthy content?
Netflix.
What is one mental model? Go deeper, baby. Why Netflix?
Why Netflix? Because we have to almost cultivate our taste. How can you be a good chef if you haven't eaten a lot of different types of cuisine? So go to the home of the most binge-worthy content in the world. It's Netflix, and that's a proxy. It's like saying Xerox for copying. It's a proxy for Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus. Choose your pick. Watch a lot of shows. It will give you an informed opinion.
I love that, because you are truly competing with Netflix and some of these others for content, which is crazy nowadays. I've heard that, and that really resonated. What is one mental model you rely on heavily when creating binge-worthy content, which you probably covered maybe on the show already, but what's a mental model that you...
Yes. So I would say it's three things. Put your customer at the center of the narrative. Focus on an urgent problem that you can help solve, and then create a compelling premise to bring it all together.
Beautiful. What's a book or resource that has significantly influenced your community building philosophy? Is there any books on community or something even totally different that just has helped in community building?
Anything by Seth Godin, but specifically Tribes.
Have you read his newest? I think he had like The Practice. He's had the Song of Significance come out. Seth Godin, have you read?
Oh, I haven't.
Those
read
are so
that.
good.
I haven't read that.
I haven't read Tribes, so I got to go back and you got to come forward. But it's so cool to see where
that's a treat.
He's come now.
He is amazing. He's a national treasure. I just got to say.
Yeah. Without him, I think the marketing world would be further off than we already are, which is scary to even imagine or think about. What's a counterintuitive or a strategy you didn't think would work that you've employed, whether in content demand generation, that then after worked, that you're surprised on?
Counterintuitive. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit back on this one. I used to write children's superhero books. Okay. maybe that doesn't sound that far-fetched, considering I thought I was Peter Parker when I was growing up. But as a young parent, I mentioned that when I was a kid, I had a lot of social anxiety. So when I became a parent, I decided to start writing superhero books to help my kids learn that even when you carry things that you think are struggles, you could still be strong. Okay, so I ended up writing 50 of these children's books. I traveled around the world, and I remember one day I was on a trip back from Ethiopia. I'd gone all the way out to Ethiopia to talk to some kids about being superheroes and such. I came back. This guy picks me up in an Uber. It was one of the first Uber rides I ever took. Distinguished gentleman in a suit and tie. He carried my bag, put it in the trunk. It turns out he was a veteran. I can't remember which war he served in. Please excuse me. He was about 70 years old. And so I'm telling him about the books. And I mentioned one of my heroes. One of my heroes is autistic, but he's also a detective genius. And the driver gets visibly emotional. And he says his grandson is autistic. And, but is such a caring, loving kid. And we end up talking about his kid the whole ride home. When we get to the house, I tell him to wait. I run in the house. I come back out. I give him a copy of the book. He's like, oh, no. He starts to, feel his pockets for money. I'm like, I'm not going to take your money. Thank you for your service, sir. I hope that helps your grandkid. He's insisting. I run into the house. I'm like, I'm not going to take your money. Maybe that generated me one reader, right? It didn't bring me a flood of pipeline or revenue. But to see the tears that welled up in this man's face, I never met this man before. I haven't seen him since. That incident has stuck with me. And I think it brings together a lot of the stuff that we talked about, putting your audience at the center of the story, focusing on a core problem that they haven't been able to solve anywhere else, wrapping a premise around it, and at the end of the day, being human. There's a bunch of tactics that I could spout out, retargeting and paid ads, and what's the latest thingamabob, right? They're here today, gone tomorrow. Storytelling is undefeated. Humanity is forever. Make those your major, and you'll never minor again in anything. You'll be the GOAT. That's what Seth Godin does. Yes. So there must be something to it.
Yeah, I love that. Those unscalable actions are usually the things that create some of the best rewards long term, and they don't look, to your point, of significant pipeline. It's just the fact that you had a positive collision with this person that you wouldn't have if you were kind of closed off, or if you had this hard sell mindset, and then it would have never got there. And I'm just going to make the large assumption that had ripple effects in that individual's life, and then obviously, hopefully, in his grandson's life. And you just have no clue where that can go and where that can spout. And I think that the same, to your point, is about marketing. Stop trying to kind of amass these huge followers or all that. Clearly, it's useful to have a Death Star to point it when you have large followers, but it's really those one-to-one human connections that if you help one person make progress today, I can go to bed happily. So I really enjoyed that. And I think that's a good way to end all of our marketing talk, because we've been kind of doing this kind of back and forth of life and marketing, but I'm really excited to kind of get into a little bit of life, kind of your philosophies and some of those of yours. So first question, there's this movie called Inception. Are you aware of it? Have you watched it?
Yes.
So in the movie, for the three listeners who don't know what it is, in the movie, they go into people's brains, into their dreams, and they incept an idea. You're going to sell your company tomorrow, and that person wakes up the next day, thinks the idea is their own, acts out of that idea. So if you could incept an idea into the minds of every human, into the minds of every marketer, so tomorrow we wake up and whatever idea you incepted, I act out. So if that's kindness is the most important thing, I'm acting out of that, and I'm the most kind person I could be. What is the idea, the belief, the thing that you incept in all of our minds?
I'm going to use something that came to me some years ago when I was in the process of talking to all these young people about the superhero books. And it's not something that I just thought of, but it was through the interactions that I started to realize this was a theme. And it was this phrase: I see you, I believe in you, and one day you will change the world. I see you because at the end of the day, everybody wants to feel seen, wants to feel appreciated, wants to feel acknowledged. I believe in you because sometimes we don't believe in ourselves. Sometimes the data is telling us one thing. It's telling us we're not the person for the job. We can't do it. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of scars and scabs from how life has beaten us down. We all need at least that one person that says, no, I believe in you, despite what reality is telling you. And then finally, one day you will change the world. I worked for a manager some years ago who said he got into tech because he believed in the power of one line of code being able to change 1 billion lives. And, that sounded really impressive to me. But I want to sort of temper this phrase, you'll change the world, with hopefully that's underguarded and underpinned by some level of ethical foundation, because we are witnessing a lot of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who are changing the world with their code, and not necessarily for the better. But I believe that if we honor that inner child of ours, like Darth Vader wasn't born evil. Come on, people, right? If we honor that inner child, if we could tell young Darth, I see you, I believe in you. He might have not gone to the dark side, Jordan. So that would be the idea. I see you, I believe in you. One day you will change the world.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think sometimes we can get too caught up in life, too caught up in salaries, all these things that I think the core, and I've had many conversations with people, is to see people. I'm a follower of Christ. So throughout the Bible, yes, you can take all of these scriptures, these parables, but really it comes down to, for me, Jesus was changing how people saw, and changing that they see the people that most times weren't seen. The whole Samaritan story was built to say, these people are your neighbor. Who is my neighbor, Jesus? Hoping that they're not my neighbor, so I don't have to see their true humanity, I think, at the core. And then I go a step further, is how do I see people? And this is maybe just my own personal tactic, but how I see people is by listening. I think at the core of being seen is if someone can't understand your story enough to really see, like, how can you see someone without listening to them, without understanding they think the world revolves? So I really think that's powerful, because in marketing, that can be easily applied to your audience, as like weird as that is help them feel seen, as kind of meta as that is. So I really am glad you brought that into this conversation. What value or what belief do you think needs more attention in today's time? So obviously there's, the kind of the cardinal virtues, love, justice, discipline. Like, what do you think of those, or of other beliefs or values that you have that we need to put a little bit more emphasis on for just a better world?
Yeah. I think there's a book that I read many years ago, and it's one that most people maybe never heard of. It's not from a famous author. It's titled The One Sentence Persuasion Course. And I forget the name of the author. It might be Blair Warren or something of that nature. It's probably an ebook PDF you can find online. But he has this phrase where he says, it's so valuable when you can, as a marketer, enter the conversation already going on in their mind. Enter the conversation already going on in their mind. If you think about, there's a lot of conflict that's going on around the world right now, without getting too specific, it's very, very easy to form a caricature or to demonize people who seem to be on the other side. At the core of it, humans are tribal, and we became tribal as a survival mechanism, right? Let's band resources together so we can survive the elements, so we can survive these wild animals. But as we started to find ways to protect ourselves from those outside threats, we started to turn that tribalism against other humans. And unfortunately, you see it in politics, you see it in sports, you see it in geopolitical interactions. We start to dehumanize the people on the other side. But what if we could enter the conversation? If I'm trying to change Jordan's mind, why don't I this is exactly what Jordan was talking about. Why don't I really figure out where he's coming from first? Stephen Covey, he wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his habits is to seek first to understand before you're understood. I think that's a value more of us should adopt.
Oh, I love that. Bolaji, what is one thing you do outside of work, outside of business marketing, that when you do it, it enables you to come back to business, come back to marketing more refreshed, more refined? What habit, what practice comes to mind?
Oh, hands down, it's coaching youth soccer. So I've got a 13-year-old son. I've been coaching his team for about 5 years. So since they were about 8 or 9 years old. And if you think about, they talk about herding cats. They should call it herding young boys. Because I'm like, Jimmy, put that down. Stop punching him. Get over here. Will you? Oh my gosh. But I feel so energized afterward. First of all, we are in an environment of play. A lot of youth sports, for those who either participated in youth sports or have kids in youth sports now, a lot of youth sports, perhaps because there's money in it and parents are driving the kids there, so the parents are present a lot, we've put a lot of pressure onto these kids. It's become all about the win. And it shouldn't be that. When I was growing up, we played soccer in the streets. Often we didn't have a soccer ball. We would use a tin can. We would use plastic bags wrapped up in rubber bands. We would use rolled up newspaper. We didn't have, I didn't own cleats until I was in my 20s. We played barefoot. Play. The joy of play. If you can, as an adult, put yourself in an environment where you have the privilege to be able to play, there is nothing greater for rejuvenating you, giving your creativity a boost, helping you to become a better human. Go coach some kids in soccer.
That's the second time now. Season 1, I had somebody, I don't know if it was soccer, but coaching. And there's just so much you can learn, to your point, by hurting young boys, or probably young girls as well, I'm guessing, all
Yes.
young kids. But I think it's a cool theme because obviously, as I mentioned before, follower of Christ, one of the things is to be like children, right? Those who will inherit the kingdom will be like children. Well, what is that immature? Is that what does that mean? And I think a lot of it comes down to that. It's the ability to play because you don't care how I look. I don't need to do something that I'm kind of good at. I can go do something that I suck at and just play with, which I don't do much, and I know many adults don't. So I think it's so important. Julia Cameron wrote this book on kind of artist dates she talks about, and that's essentially once a week for 2 hours. Go wherever you can, go to a bookstore, go to a movie by yourself, and essentially play. Kind of let yourself have these artist date. Let the inner artist within you kind of just express itself in ways that you typically would say, we don't do that as adults. We don't just kind of go to a restaurant by myself, right? I wouldn't go. So I think that's an important lesson is like, if I'm not playing enough, if I'm not playing outside of work, like I won't be able to do the game in work as well if I'm not playing outside, which is a counterintuitive lesson that I've sadly had to learn through some anxiety and panic attacks, that you need to play and not just work crazy. So that's a really good reminder. So to finish the podcast off, I have one question for you. We talked about kind of what have you changed your mind on. We talked a lot about changing times. But what's one thing you hope doesn't change? In 15, 20 years, is there something that you hope we stick to? You hope that we kind of keep doing and that we don't allow AI or some of these things to kind of outsource it to? Is there anything that comes to mind that you just hope we don't change?
Such a big question. Such a big question. And
What's life?
part of the human condition, I think, our brains are hardwired for a negative bias. Again, going back into how we've evolved, in order to protect ourselves, we tend to notice the things that are broken or the things that are dangerous, let me say it that way, so that we're like, fire bad, let me stay away from that. Or, there's a cliff over there, kids don't play there. So asking, what do you want to keep the same? I'm like, okay, let me put turn off the negative hardwiring off.
Yeah, seriously.
And I'm like, what is great right now that I want to keep? Let me give two answers. One is a little bit related to negative hardwiring, but I'll say I hope climate change doesn't get worse. So if it stayed where it is
Preach.
right now, it could be better, but at least it wouldn't be getting worse. So that's one thing. But I'll answer it on a more personal and individual level. What's one thing that I hope doesn't change? I hope the human instinct to make things better for the next generation doesn't change. If you look at it on a family level, for those of us, if we're not parents, we certainly have been kids. And not all of us were blessed to have a positive relationship with our parents. But a lot of us did. And a lot of us are standing on the shoulders of our parents. If it wasn't our parents, it might have been a sports coach or a teacher or some older person who looked out for us. Most of us have had someone who has said, I see you, I believe in you, and one day you'll change the world. And I hope that never changes. We're getting better and better as a species at optimizing, at increasing efficiency, at using technology to invent new things. And the more of those inventions and technological leaps that we make, the more I value just the core of humanity. Community, empathy, being able to relate to one another and help one another. I hope that doesn't change.
That is, I don't think any other place we could end this podcast than there. That's well said, well put. And I would love the Earth in 15 years if we still are focused on making the area that we're in just a little bit better, because that was definitely the way of the past. When you lived in a place forever, locatos, they would say that you give back to the place you're at. Today, we are more transient than ever. And I think that is somewhat being shaken, because why Green Bay, I'll be gone in 5 years. I don't care, like getting engaged with anybody here. That's the wrong attitude, at least I found through my journey. So I think it's so important. Not only to your point, we bring generational wealth in the sense of emotional, financial, and we're always building upon that point that you said of my parents. Yes, my parents gave me an amazing childhood, which then makes me raise the bar even higher of how can I keep making this better and not revert back. So I think that's a critical kind of a mindset to just keep it, is how can I, where I'm placed, I want to be somewhere else regardless of that, where I'm placed right now, how can I leave it just a bit better than it was when I came? And I think if everybody did that, it would be a real nice earth that we lived on. Climate change would, I think, get solved, right? Like just baking that into this, if we always made the earth a bit better, I think we'd be focused on that. So I love the way you brought that in as well. Well, thank you so much, Bolaji, for coming on, for having a really human conversation. I really appreciated your time today.
Ooh, I survived. Oh my gosh, this was hard, Jordan.
Yeah. It is. It's not easy, the ringer. I really appreciate you coming on.
Let me just tell you, Jordan, honestly and sincerely, I think life is so busy. Modern life is so busy, particularly for us professionals. We don't often slow down to be introspective and to ask ourselves these type of questions. Sometimes you'll ask yourself a question, or a thought will go through your head. Maybe there's a question you don't have the answer to, but without having to verbalize or defend your position, without having to articulate it, that internal dialogue can get away with a lot of loosey-goosey stuff. You presenting these very pointed questions, they're not crazy questions, but it's like, no one's ever asked me to say that out loud before. I think it's a privilege to be able to answer these questions, and I hope more professionals get to sit where I'm sitting right now, because they're going to be better for it.
Thank you. And again, thank you for coming on. I have to end now with that type of compliment. I can't go on any further. There's nothing you can say that'll beat that. So we have to end. Thank you so much for coming on, Bolaji. And I hope maybe in the long, long future we can do this again. It was so much fun.
That would be awesome. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you for making it to the end. It means the world to me that you watch or you listen to this episode, and hopefully you're walking away with new insights to improve how you think about marketing in life and help you make progress on what matters to you. But one thing before you go, if you could subscribe wherever you're listening to this or watching, that would really help out both you getting the episodes right when they come out and raising this podcast in the rankings. So hopefully more people like you can listen to this. And if there's anything that I can do to make this podcast more beneficial for you, if it's somebody you think I should interview, if you're the person, please comment, please email me. It's in the show notes, so we can just continually deliver more value to you, the listener. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day, evening, week, and hope to see you here next time.